Are you keeping your coffee in the fridge, maybe? In the freezer? Or somewhere in your cupboard next to olive oil and biscuits? Are you sure you're storing it in the right way? Let me explain the best way to store your coffee, whether it's your go-to daily brew or a super special bag that you want to enjoy over time. Now, before we dive in, just so you know, I am not just a coffee nerd, I am also a food technologist. I have a degree in food science and I'm still working in the food industry. So, yeah, food science is my jam. And when I talk about coffee storage, it's not just vibes, but it's science. First thing, what is coffee? Coffee is not just a drink, it's a super complex organic substance. We are talking over 1,000 compounds packed into those tiny roasted beans. And inside your cup you have got carbs that influence sweetness and mouthfeel, proteins and amino acids. These are key during roasting thanks to Maillard reactions, the lipids, or coffee oils, super important for the body, the crema, and the aroma retention. Then we have the acids like citric, malic, and chlorogenic, and they all add layers to the flavor. Also the volatile organic compounds, and this gives to your coffee its unique smell, and alkaloids like caffeine that gives you that lovely buzz. With so much going on, it's no surprise that coffee needs the right storage to keep all that goodness intact. And here is the thing. Many of these amazing compounds are also pretty delicate. Some react quickly with oxygen, others degrade when exposed to heat, moisture or light. And that complexity we love, it also makes coffee more vulnerable. So even if your beans looks fine weeks later, the flavor might already be a shadow of its former self. That's exactly why understanding shelf life is key. Now let's talk about what it really means. What is shelf life? Talking about coffee, it's the amount of time a product stays at its best in terms of flavor, aroma, and safety when stored properly. Shelf life depends on how you store the coffee or even how it's processed. And let's make some examples. For whole beans stored in a bag that is unopened, we can say 3 to 6 months. Then we have the case of CO2 or nitrogen flushed bags where shelf life can be longer than 6 months. For whole beans in a bag that is already open, we can say 2-4 weeks if it's stored well, but in my experience this can be extended even to 2-3 months if it's stored well. When we talk about ground coffee, the shelf life is shorter once you open the bag, usually 1-2 weeks. That's because ground coffee is more exposed to oxygen and moisture, for example. That's why a lot of times you can find ground coffee packed in a kind of brick, vacuum brick, and that is to extend this shelf life, reduce the contact between coffee grounds and oxygen, for example. And then we can also talk about instant coffee that has a long shelf life up to 2 years, but flavors can fade fast once it's opened. The most common and widely recommended method to store the coffee is simply this: keep it away from light, heat and moisture. In other words, store it in a dark, cool and dry place. This is the golden rule in coffee storage. And not just for coffee, but for all the food that goes stored in the cupboard of our kitchen. Now let's have a look at what this actually means. Why dark? Because light, especially sunlight, can speed up the breakdown of delicate aroma compounds. That's why clear jars may look pretty, but they are the worst choice for freshness. Why cool? Because heat speeds up chemical reactions, including oxidation. So avoid sunny windowsills, countertops near the oven, or anywhere warm. Why dry? Because moisture is a freshness killer. And coffee is hygroscopic. Remember this word, hygroscopic, meaning it acts like a little sponge sucking humidity from the air. That extra moisture doesn't just dull the flavor, but it can lead to clumping, mold, and ruin a bag of beans. The bean becomes soft and make kind of a paste when you grind it. So yeah, keeping your coffee dry isn't just a nice to have, but it's essential. And now we are diving into something called water activity. It's a slightly deeper food science concept, but trust me, it's worth knowing. Not just for coffee beans, but for food storage in general. Water activity is the measure of how much free water is present in a food product. The water that is basically available for things like microbial growth or chemical reactions. Higher the number, higher the chances of this growth and reactions. It is measured on a scale from 0 to 1, where 0 means completely dry, so no water available, and 1 means pure water, maximum availability for microbial growth. Think of it like this: total water is what's inside the products, but water activity is what's actually available to do stuff like growing mold or spoiling the flavor. So lower water activity in general means better shelf stability. Coffee, for example, has naturally a low water activity, usually in the 0.2-0.6 range, and that is a good thing. It means if we keep it sealed and dry, it won't spoil fast. But if your beans are left in a humid environment or get exposed to air, they start absorbing moisture like a thirsty sponge. And that water activity level gets higher. Here a quick look at typical water activity values. For example, the fresh meat, very high, 0.99, and that's why it spoils fast. You need to keep it in the fridge to make sure that this microbial growth is slower. The cheese as well, over 0.9, vegetables as well. Then we go a bit lower, we have pasta, coffee, and biscuits. For example, the water activity is 0.2, 0.6, and that is great if kept dry, not so much if left in humid spots. And that's why storage matters, because once the water activity goes up, freshness goes down fast. Chemical reactions are speed up and also higher risk of mold growing. There is another component that can ruin your coffee, but that is not taken in consideration in the dark, cool, dry place storage, and that is the oxygen. Oxygen is sneaky, it's all around us, and we kind of forget it's there. But for coffee, it's one of the biggest enemies. Oxygen reacts with the delicate aromatic compounds in your beans and causes them to break down, and that is oxidation. And oxidation is equal stale, flat-tasting coffee. Even just opening the bag every day can let in a small amount of air that gradually degrade your beans. That's why how you store it and how much air it's exposed to really matters. Here is a breakdown of typical storage setups and how much oxygen exposure they give you. An original bag that has been open gives you high oxygen exposure, especially if you're not sealing it properly each time. An airtight container is better because it limits the oxygen but still has some trapped inside. A vacuum canister is much better because it removes air and slows down oxidation, and freezing with vacuum seal is top tier. Almost no oxygen exposure, best for long-term storage. Now, speaking of top tier storage, let's talk about freezing and why I added vacuum seal next to it. Freezing coffee can be a great way to keep it fresh, especially for a long period storage. But, and this is important, only if you do it properly. First of all, let's start with understanding why we are doing this in the first place. To slow down aging and preserve those amazing aromas and flavors. But it's not as simple as just tossing your bag of beans into the freezer. Never do that. If done wrong, you will introduce moisture, accelerate oxidation, and damage the flavor profile. Let me explain you why. If you store a bag of a jar of coffee, beans or ground in the freezer, every time you are going to take it out from the freezer, open the bag or the jar to get your dose, coffee is able to absorb the moisture from the environment outside the freezer even faster than when you kept the coffee outside, like for example in the cupboard, because they will try to stabilize faster with the kitchen ambient. Remember, hygroscopic, act like a sponge, it's able to attract a lot of moisture. Then, when you close the bag again and place it back in the freezer, the moisture crystallizes, creating ice with the risk of breaking even more the coffee cells, making everything worse. And if you do it every day, coffee will last less than if you just store it in an airtight container in the cupboard. So, not worth it. Also, oxygen will be always present in the container in the freezer. That is okay to slow down chemical reactions like mold growth, but that actually speed up the coffee oil's oxidation. Let's take back the water activity plot. You are familiar with that now. If you notice, below 0.2, the curve of lipid oxidation actually goes up, and that is because water acts as a stabilizer for lipids. And low water activity, because in the freezer, means less water available to protect them from oxidation, because it becomes ice. Basically, don't store a full bag of coffee in the freezer for then taking a small dose from it on a regular basis, especially if your beans are shiny on the outside. Those are oils that escape from broken coffee cells due to excessive roasting. They are prone to oxidation in a very fast way. So, how is the right way to store your coffee in the freezer? The best way is to vacuum seal single doses, removing excessive oxygen and moisture from the coffee portion. The pros are that you take only what you need without spoiling the rest, and the portion lasts longer because of the vacuum environment. The cons is the fact that it takes so much time and also money to portion every single dose. I recommend it only if you have some premium coffee that you want to keep for longer. In my case, I do this only for competition graded coffee. Once all the portions are in the freezer and you want to make a coffee, what you do? Open the freezer, get the dose, and here you have two options. The first one is that you open the bag, you grind it, and you brew it straight away. Or the second one, that you leave the dose closed, very important, outside the freezer until the temperature of the beans reaches the temperature of the outside environment, and then you open the bag. In that case, you don't need to rush, because the beans won't absorb the humidity as fast as if you open the bag straight away after you take the dose from the freezer, and this avoids condensation. In this case, I usually take out the dose the night before for the morning after. A good tip is to label your bags with the roast date and the freeze date. That way you will always know what's freshest. Now you are going to tell me, Matteo, if I have a big bag of coffee beans and I want to make sure their freshness will last for longer, what can I do? I cannot divide every single portion. And you're right, I will never suggest that. But let's say, for example, you got a 1 kilo bag of coffee beans. What you can do is this. Divide the whole amount in 4 portions of 250 grams or 5 portions of 200 grams. One portion you keep it in an airtight or a vacuum container. The other 3 or 4 you vacuum seal. Or if you don't have a vacuum sealer, place the portions in Ziploc bags. Try to squeeze out as much oxygen you can. You can even wrap them in cling film to make sure further oxygen doesn't reach the inside of the bag. Label each bag with name of the coffee, roast date and freeze date, and store them in the freezer. Now you will start using the portion you kept in the container in the cupboard. Once you finish that portion the night before, take one of the portions you store in the freezer and leave it outside overnight without opening it. The day after, you open the bag and place the whole content in the canister, and you use it daily. And so on with the remaining ones. Using just 200 or 250 grams at a time, coffee will be fresher for longer. I don't suggest freezing in a glass container because you can still have a good portion of oxygen inside, but if you do, make sure that is a glass container suitable for freezing, otherwise it can crack or break. Don't refreeze. Once you have defrosted a batch, don't throw it back in the freezer. It messes with the cell structure and freshness. That is actually a rule essential for all kinds of food. Now that we covered the freezing storage, let's talk about vacuum storage. Vacuum storage might sound like something only mad scientists or coffee geeks use, but honestly, it's a super effective way to preserve your beans. Here is the idea. You remove as much air, especially oxygen, as possible from the container that holds your coffee. Oxygen is the sneaky villain behind stale beans. So, less air equal more freshness. But, as always with coffee, balance is key. Too much vacuum can actually be a problem. When you apply extremely high vacuum pressure, you risk damaging the coffee bean structure or pulling out delicate aromatic compounds. It's like over-squeezing a sponge. You lose more than you gain. Here is a breakdown of how much vacuum is just right. -20 to -30 psi is perfect for everyday storage. Protects against oxygen without stressing the beans. This is your go-to for countertop vacuum canisters. And this is the negative pressure range most of the vacuum canisters on the market reach. Like for example, the Outpeak canister I use reaches -20 psi. This eliminates a good portion of oxygen and moisture without pulling out CO2 and also excessive moisture and oxygen from the inside the beans, helping you to preserve the coffee for longer. I have also tried -40 to -50 psi, which is awesome for long-term storage. Ideal if you have portioned out your beans and don't plan on opening them for weeks. On the market, it's harder to find a canister for home use that reaches -40 or -50 psi. In the end, I don't suggest it, I think it's too excessive and also more expensive. When vacuum at -60 psi or higher, it's a little too hardcore. At this level you may start pulling out volatile aromatics and even crushing softer beans, so forget about that. Now some practical tips. Use vacuum containers designed for coffee. The manual pump ones are good, automatic ones are even better. Another tip is to get a small vacuum canister. Don't get a big canister that can contain 1 kilo of coffee, because even if it's safer than -60 psi and above, applying every time -20 psi to the beans can be stressful for them. With a smaller canister you can consume the content faster, and if you buy the coffee by the kilo you can use the portioning freezing technique I was explaining before and use a small canister to store the defrost portion of beans. Another good idea is to use a non-transparent canister. This keeps out the light, which can mess up with your coffee delicate aromas and speed up degradation. And don't forget, vacuum is not a substitute of dark, cool, dry place. Combine all three with vacuum and you've got a near perfect storage setup. So, if you're serious about keeping your coffee fresher for longer but freezing sounds too dramatic, vacuum storage might just be your new best friend. Alright, it's time for a little tough love. Let's talk about what not to do. These are the common mistakes or coffee crimes that a lot of us make without even realizing it. The first one is storing the coffee in the fridge. I get it, fridge seems like a dry cool place and many people suggest it. But we also know that the world is full of criminals, so don't be one of them. The reality is that the fridge is a place where you can have high humidity, especially every time you open it, and also strong odors from the food that you store inside. If you remember, once again, I explained the fact that the coffee is hygroscopic, so meaning that loves to absorb moisture and also smells. So there can be a chance you replace the nice caramel nutty flavor with last night garlic pasta. That could be interesting, but definitely not something you are planning to experience in your cup of coffee. Even if the fridge is always closed and there is no food inside, every time you're going to open the bag or the container, the beans will still absorbing higher humidity and faster from the kitchen environment, like I mentioned when I was talking about freezing. Not storing coffee in the fridge is the same reason why you don't store biscuits in the fridge, basically. Another common mistake is to use a clear jar and leave it outside on the shelf. In this way, the clear jar lets the light in, and as I said, it's going to degrade the coffee quality. If you want to store it in a clear jar, place it in a dark cupboard. That's better. Another mistake is to keep the coffee in open bags. Rolling down the top of the bag and clipping it is better than nothing, but still lets in oxygen and moisture. So if your bag doesn't reseal, I suggest to put it in an airtight container or a vacuum canister. Also storing near heat sources, that's another mistake. Keep your coffee away from the stove, from the oven, from sunny windowsills. Heat speed up oxidation, aroma loss, and moisture buildup. Also mixing old and new beans, so don't top off an old bag with a new one. It contaminates the fresh batch and messes with consistency, so finish one before opening the next. A last one is keeping the coffee near spices. Coffee, as I said, is super absorbent and maybe you don't want it soaking up cumin or cinnamon or other spices. So even if it's in the cupboard, try to avoid place the coffee in the same cupboard as your spices. You are allowed to do that only during autumn, so you can get a natural pumpkin spice beans. No, I'm joking. These mistakes might seem small, but they add up fast. Especially if you're buying high-quality specialty coffee, you don't want to waste those precious notes. Avoid the crimes, treat your beans right, and you will taste the difference in every cup. Alright, let's wrap up this video. This is what you need to remember. Keep the coffee in a dark, cool, dry place, airtight or vacuum, go for it. Freezing, portion first, fridge, forget it. Now let me give you a quick roadmap for how to store your coffee, from the simplest to the nerdiest. If you are using the coffee quickly, you can keep it in the original bag. If it's resealable and airtight, just store it in a cool, dark place. Better yet, transfer it to an opaque or dark airtight container. Glass or stainless steel is ideal. If you have a vacuum canister, even better, store small portions in those and only open when you need. If you got more coffee than what you will use in a month or more, it's time to portion and freeze. Divide into weekly doses, vacuum seal or tightly zip-lock each portion, and when you are ready to use one, defrost it slowly before opening, then keep it in an airtight or vacuum container for daily use. And if you want to store for longer competition-graded beans, I suggest you to divide it in portion, vacuum seal each portion, place it in the freezer, and take out only when you want to brew one of these portions. Match your storage game to your coffee habits, and you will always have beans that taste like they should. Coffee deserves love, from roast to brew. And yes, even in storage. If you are made it this far, you are officially not just a coffee drinker, but also a coffee caretaker. Now feel free to tell me in the comments what's your storage setup, or do you have any storage horror stories, or even tips of your own? Drop them below. If this video helped, give it a like, share it with your coffee friends, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you in my next videos. And in the meantime, I wish you a wonderful day and delicious coffee.